This is my first podcast in 2025 in English language. I just want to say thank you very much for coming in for UATV in London, where we're recording. So today's title is going to be called When Ukraine Meets Britain, Love, Culture and Identity. The theme today is a love story across borders, becomes deeper dialogue and about language, values, stereotypes, grief, pride and public responsibility. As we know, Maria is Ukrainian. They have come to UK 3 years ago, right? Yeah. During the war. And Jaz Myers is British and also in love with Maria. And this is very interesting because you're British and Ukraine coming together, living together and living life together, if you know what I mean. So I'm going to start with the intro and then we're going to start with the questions. So we have 4 topics. And so this is how it goes. What happens when 2 cultures shaped by different histories, languages and expectations come together? Not in theory, but in partnership. In today's episode, I sit down with Maria Romanenko, a Ukrainian journalist, and Jaz Myers, a British consultant. This isn't just about love. It's about culture shock, identity battles, shared grief, public criticism, and lessons they've learned from walking between 2 worlds. This is something that we talk about in Identity Talks. We talk about identity from both sides. Why? Because I grew up in Ukraine and came to UK in '98. So I feel kind of stuck in two worlds. So I'm going to start with 5 segments I would like to talk to you about. So number 1, I want to talk about cross-cultural love story. I want to talk about British and Ukrainian values. I'd like to talk about language, identity, and belongings. 3, 4 is public work and private pressure, because I know, Maria, you're a public figure when it comes to Ukrainian here in UK. And my last one is building a new identity together. So I'm going to start with the first to Maria. I'll say start with Maria. How did the Ukrainian journalist and a British consultant advocate fall in love? How did you guys meet? How did you guys fall in love?
So back in Ukraine, since 2017, I was working at Hromadske International. I was the chief editor. It's an English language multimedia news outlet. And Jaz already started coming to Ukraine because he once visited because there was a cheap flight. He really liked him, made friends. Jaz makes friends.
Which year are you talking about? Which year was this?
So it was 2020 when we started dating. And I posted, he was following me on Twitter because he previously gave an interview to my news outlet. And one day during, it's like peak lockdown basically, and I tweeted, what's the weirdest thing you've done during lockdown? Here's what I did. And he responded and we started chatting, and somehow the UK was one of the 6 places you could fly from Ukraine during lockdown, which didn't really make sense. So I ended up going because I had like a week of my visa left, for tourist visa. So I went and visited Manchester, and that's how I met up with Jaz for the first time in person, and since then we kind of been together. So it's 5 years now this month.
Wow.
5 years.
So when you went to UK, was it your first time going to UK?
No, so I did my A-levels in England, and I went to university in the UK as well, and then I returned to Ukraine after graduating. So that was 2014. I graduated university, and then I lived in Ukraine after.
But did you meet Jaz in Ukraine?
The first time we physically met, we met on Twitter basically, but the first time we physically met, it was in Manchester.
Okay, so when you came to Manchester and you saw him for the first time, what did you think of him?
Putting me on the spot here. Well, we already video chatted loads, so it was nice to see him in person. It was a really strange time, it was just like everything was shut down. Although the UK was a bit more lax. Ukraine, you had to wear your face masks everywhere. We had so many rules. And the UK was a bit more lax, but it was a really strange time to start dating. And I think that's what kind of describes our relationship really, really, really well, is that we started dating during lockdown. Then it went straight to full-scale war. We had my mum living with us for the first 10.5 months since we came here, because she basically followed me. She came a couple of weeks later. We've always been living in this time of disturbance and uncertainty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. And what about you, Jaz? Well, what did you think when Maria came to see you first time?
I think Maria's being very generous, and she probably looked at me and thought, wow, he's shorter than I expected. Or possibly even, wow, he's even more handsome in real life, but I'm not sold on that. No, I mean, I think the interesting thing for me was Maria and I we started sharing messages, and then we had our first phone chat, and it lasted for like 45 minutes. And then we had another phone conversation. It lasted for like 4 hours. So, I mean, Maria obviously is stunningly beautiful. There's no getting around that fact. But there was, we just could talk and talk and talk. And that's kind of the basis of the relationship. And, she pushes me to do things and be a better person. And hopefully I push her to do similar things as well.
Thank you. My second question to both of you is that what were your first cultural misunderstandings as a couple?
Oh, I'll take this. It's quite an interesting one, because before I started going to Ukraine, so even if you go back sort of 8 years before my first trip, yes, I knew of Russia's invasion in 2014, but realistically, British knowledge, your typical British knowledge of Ukraine, Chernobyl, Shevchenko,
Klitschko brothers,
former Soviet, former communism, war. The knowledge simply wasn't there. It just didn't exist, and so I found myself going to Lviv, which is probably the most westernized and culturally, for me, for Western person, the most culturally accessible place, but finding these incredibly friendly, welcoming people who wanted to meet a British guy, essentially, because there wasn't the tourism there, and they were just like really, really welcoming, and it's there. But in terms of culture, it's really interesting, because one of the things that always strikes me is in Britain we have nationalism, and it's a negative thing. It's a terrible thing. It's racism. It's telling people to go back to where they came from, or stop in the boats, or whatever it may be. And yet, that's based essentially, as I understand it, of us being the oppressors the whole time. Whereas I go to Ukraine, who've spent centuries trying to be their own country, and they're so proud of their history and culture and music and dance. And when I think of Ukrainian nationalism, it's just the most wonderful thing, except when Maria kind of puts on Eurovision and starts dancing around the house. That's less good. But in general, it's just this most amazing thing. It's this absolute love for their country. And whilst I'm not here to talk about the invasion today, and I completely understand that, what British people don't understand is that when Ukrainians are fighting, they're not just fighting for now and for this generation. They're fighting on behalf of, centuries going back, centuries of oppression. And so that shapes the culture, that shapes the history, that shapes all the Taras Shevchenko monuments. And I think it's absolutely fantastic. The other side of it, very quickly, is that what I don't understand, or what I didn't really understand, I still don't to a point, is the collective trauma that is ingrained in the older society by Holodomor, and also, but by the overshadow of communism. So Maria's mum, when she was living with us and found UK charity shops, and she was like, this is the greatest thing. I can't believe people are just giving away all of these items. Whereas we as Brits just look at it and just go, it's crap. Of course they're giving it away. So there's some really interesting different attitudes that have come.
You said something I found really interesting. Even though you knew a tiny bit about Ukraine, there's a tiny few things, old Soviet and Klitschko brothers and Shevchenko, but you still went to Ukraine. Why? Was there business involved? What is it that you found about Ukraine that you wanted to go to Ukraine? What was the reason?
It was more sort of an accident than anything else. So I was going over to Poland, and the person who I was going to go and visit changed their jobs, and so I was going to try and extend my trip. And I thought, my friend will go away for the weekend, and I found flights to a place called Lviv. And of course, I'd never heard of Lviv, but I had a friend who had, and my mate Steve, otherwise known as Monkey for this, has toured all over the world. He toured with a band called Enter Shikari. He currently works with a big Canadian pop star called Tate McRae. So, he literally travels all over the world. And I was phoning him up, and I'm like, Monkey, have you ever been to a place called Lviv in Ukraine? He's like, Jaz, mate, I've been twice. The second time was so good that I stayed for an extra couple of days drinking. when are you going? And I told him, and he goes, is there any football on? I'm like, how would I know if there's football on? I didn't even know this place existed 5 minutes ago. And we look it up, and it's actually the Lviv Derby. And so we fly over, and on the plane over, people are like, you're going to Ukraine. What are you doing? And I'm like, I've come to watch Lviv Derby. I'm like, no, really? Why are you here? And this was a continual question that we kept being asked, because people were shocked at two Brits coming over to Ukraine, coming over to Lviv to watch the football. A couple of days into my trip, I found Cantonar Bar, a Manchester United Eric Cantona themed pub. Fell in love with it, became really good friends with the owners, Andy and Katya, and couldn't stay away.
Thank you for sharing that. What about you, Maria? What was your cultural misunderstanding as a couple?
I think I can share one good example. The thing is, I'm a little bit anglicized because I've obviously previously studied here. But there's one thing that I think to this day I struggle to really understand, and that's football related. And football, I think, is an interesting subject because it is, especially in the UK, it's like the heart of the community, isn't it? And in Ukraine, especially because we had 11 years of war now, there's been so many people trying to divide Ukraine and all of that. Football brings people together. So, when Shakhtar Donetsk does well, the whole country will be behind it, will be supporting it, no matter who your football club actually is. I didn't realize how different it would be in the UK. So Jaz took me to see his team is Manchester United. He took me to see Manchester United versus Liverpool. That was a Manchester United ground in Manchester. And there was police and horses separating the two groups of fans. When we were actually at the stadium, there was so much abuse being shouted at each other between the fans. It was really, really crude. It was such bad language. And I was just they genuinely hate each other. I never saw anything like this. And then I was asking Jaz questions. I was like, but what if Manchester United didn't make it to some big European cup, but Liverpool did or Manchester City did? Would you not be supporting that club just because they're English? He was like, no, of course not. And I'm like, what? That's never the case for Ukraine. So that's I think is the best example for me of the difference, because Ukrainians, they come together, they support each other. The fans will be friendly with each other. If it's Dynamo Kiev, Shakhtar Donetsk, they'll be very civil. They will be friends, and that's definitely doesn't really happen here often.
It's true. Thank you. Jaz, a question for you. Did you ever feel overwhelmed by the Ukrainian side of the relationship?
I think I've been okay, but there's certainly so. What happened obviously is we fled the all-out invasion together, and we came over to the UK. And what was very interesting, firstly, about our journey was that, and we do a talk called "How Not to Flee a War," and we go around universities and colleges and schools and general public and do it. What's really interesting is you have two people who are sharing exactly the same experience, but having a completely different experience. So Maria's always there talking about emotion and family and life and jobs and the huge change that she's going through. And I'm there kind of talking about how my football's been disrupted and how I want to get home and how I don't have that emotional connection. So I'm just very, very pragmatic. But when we got to the UK, shortly after that, Maria's mum came to join us. And again, as Maria pointed out, she's very anglicised, so fitting in with her is absolutely fine. But Maria's mum had a very, very different attitude, because despite being from Kiev and living there and being Podil, which is very sort of cosmopolitan or forward thinking, certainly, she really, really struggled in the UK to understand how we do things. So cafe culture or eating out or food. There was an incident where we jokingly told her that because we were taking her out and there was a big group of us going, that the first round was on her. She didn't actually know what a round was. And then when she found out what a round was, she was aghast at the concept of having to spend all of this money on buying a round, and then sort of tried to get out of going to the night. And I think it's not so much understanding that side of culture, but it's just looking at Ukrainians who are coming here and how they fit in. We're so lucky. I'm so lucky speaking English, because I know that I can go to most places in the world and and they'll talk to me. So, I'm in Ukraine and I go to my, hand over my passport and and it's like, hi, how are you? I'm like, right, okay. Or living in Podil, you try and speak any Ukrainian. My Ukrainian's awful. I only know a few words, but they'll just want to speak to me in English. So there's always that sort of that connection where they want to do that. But yeah, so it's just a really interesting one. But you have the Ukrainians and they come here, and it's so tricky for them, because you have all of these concepts, all these different cultural ideas that they just don't understand, particularly for the older people. Again, if you're from the West, if you're from Lviv and you're young and you work in IT, you have a very different experience to if you're 65 and come from Mariupol. Very different experience.
Yeah, true. You said when you were in Ukraine, you were talking about football and so forth, and when you're here, how Ukrainians perceive you down there, it's different. And when you're coming here, how do the British look at you? Do they ask you questions? Why were you in Ukraine? What's Ukraine like? What do they ask you? Do they ask you questions?
I mean, I think a lot of my friends are asking me what I was doing there at the start of the all-out invasion.
And just a question for you: when you were talking to your friends, before you describe what Ukraine is like, what is their initial thoughts about Ukraine?
if we go back to my answer from 8 years ago, and if you're asking my friends who were for the first couple of years of our relationship, they'd not heard. So in a way, the All Out Invasion has done this phenomenal job of boosting tourism in a really, really terrible fashion. But it's kind of made people actually aware of this country. And now, because we run these trips, people want to come on these trips because they want to learn about it. So it's incredible for me to see the quality of meat and veg. We're going back over to Ukraine in a few weeks' time, just in time for strawberry season and cherry season. And we also, there's a wonderful photo of me cradling a huge Kherson watermelon like a baby, that's the size of me. And you don't get that. You don't get that sort of quality of produce. And so it's really easy for me when I'm in, when I'm in the UK, when I'm posting stuff on Facebook or for my friends, just go, look at the food, look at the drink, because those are easily relatable things. They're things everyone will understand. They'll go, that's visually appealing. And then they go, yeah, this massive breakfast from Bashevsky was £8 and it includes a glass of wine. And they're like, right, okay, I want to be part of that. So they don't really know anything, but that's why we run these trips, because when they come, they get to experience the food, they get to experience the drink, the festivals, the football, whatever it may be, but also learn about the history and culture of Lviv. So we have a very sort of weird attitude in how it happens, but Brits don't necessarily understand as much as they want. But the reality is post-victory, everyone will be wanting to come to Ukraine, and it's for us to then kind of go, great, you're now coming to Lviv, you're now coming to Kyiv, that's fantastic, but there's a huge country that needs to be explored and should be explored, and huge cultural things that should be seen. We went on our last trip, I think it was our last trip, we went up to the mountains and went to Slavsko, and we went up the mountains. Never been up there before. Absolutely stunning.
Thank you,
But
Jaz.
I'd never think of it.
Thank you. Just a quick fun twist to both of you. Who's more punctual, sarcastic, and who adapts better to change between both of you?
Is more punctual. Am I more punctual? I don't know. I always rush in the last few minutes, but I think I'm still quite punctual. Jaz is more sarcastic just because he's British. What was the last one? Who's more what?
Who adapts better to change?
Probably me, just mainly because Jaz is also autistic, so he struggles with change. But that being said, I'm also not very good with change either, I think.
I think there's an element where Maria is brilliant. And again, this is one of the things where we talk about where we're very, very different people. Maria is brilliant where you have this slow, methodical, planned out change. She can do that brilliantly. But if you wake up to find you've been bombed, she's not so great with that. So fast moving change, she's terrible at. Whereas myself, who's got ADHD and who's autistic, really, really good with high pressure, fast moving change, terrible with slow change. Absolutely awful.
Say if there was a train, like I would always aim, I would need to get a train, I would get there like 15 minutes before, but you'd probably be like 5-10 minutes. So in that regard, I think I'm more punctual, but of course it depends on various scenarios.
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. I'm going to go to topic 2, British versus Ukrainian values. So we're going to focus on beliefs, traditions, lifestyle contrast. So first question is, how does each culture define respect or strength?
I think in Ukrainian culture, strength is probably in our resilience, I would say, because, Ukrainians have always learned to adapt to whatever circumstances. Like if you think about it, it's madness how people live in Ukraine now, they mostly, because I only come and go, obviously I'm in a more privileged position. But they adapted to power cuts during winter, not only having electricity 2-3 hours a day. That's just crazy. Or living with the constant sirens, having to, always be at risk of dying far more often than you are anywhere in the UK. That's just insane. And I think that is Ukrainian strength in a sense, but also obviously through various generations, obviously Ukrainian culture, there were so many attempts at destroying it and making it underground and stuff like that. So I think that is the Ukrainian strength, hiding during occupation, hiding the Ukrainian flag deep in the ground so that you can get it out when your area is liberated and celebrate. It's all of that. And in terms of respect, it's an interesting one. I think in general, Ukrainians, they just find it a bit more difficult to open up, but they are still respectful. But once they build that connection to you, I think there's a lot of respect going on. Whereas in the UK, it can seem that there's always respect, but in reality, people don't really know anything about each other, but they will still be extra friendly, which is something you don't see in the UK. I don't know if that's the answer you were looking for, but maybe Jaz can give a better answer.
I would say certainly on the first part of this, the thing that I've noticed, and it's incredible to see, is the adaptability and resourcefulness and resilience of the Ukrainian people. To see it firsthand, for us when we visit places like the Unbroken Rehab Centre or whatever, and just to see the spirit that is there, and it's just the most painful but wonderfully uplifting thing that you can ever possibly see, really, is just these people who just have this drive and focus that I could only, dream of having, been through what they have. And I think, again, a lot of it comes from this concept of oppressor versus oppressed. I don't particularly think that we as Brits are necessarily that resilient. I'm sure we might be if we have to be. But I think the concept of having to face that kind of a struggle, it doesn't exist. It doesn't even exist in the mindset. So there's this wonderful sort of story where I talked to a friend of mine from Southampton, and I said to him, what would you do if the French invade? And he turns around and he goes, well, next morning I'd put on my new beret, I'd pop down to my local boulangerie and be like, and croissant s'il vous plaît. And because this concept, again, for us Brits, of being invaded, as you were sort of chuckling away there, it's laughable.
Yeah.
It's not something that we can ever do. And so in terms of certainly, this resilience sort of thing, we don't necessarily have to have it in the same way that Ukrainians have to have it. We don't have to constantly be looking over our shoulders and seeing what's happening and what our land neighbours are doing. In terms of respect, I think respect is it's both it's a generational and a cultural thing. I think that here there is an element of, I wouldn't say entitlement, but there is certainly a British exceptionalism. And again, without wanting to make it all about ourselves, when we do our talk, I always recall the story of how we're queuing and there are tens of thousands of people at the border all trying to get out. And I go for a wander and find the one sort of police officer, soldiery person that I can find. And I kind of go up to him sheepishly and go, is there a different queue for like British people or EU people? And he just laughs at me and points me to the back of the queue. But it's this wonderful British exceptionalism that even in times of awfulness, kind of go, this can't be happening to me. I'm British.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have that kind of thing in Britain. And it's really weird that we're British. We're the absolute kings of queuing.
Yeah.
And yet faced with a queue, I'm like, no, not for me. So I think respect takes a very different format within Britain. And that doesn't mean that there isn't respect. But I think that there's respect is based on different parameters.
I think also Ukrainians have historically had to fight for so many things. I think that's why we find it more difficult to part with even like items, even like Jaz was talking about charity shop, like people go away that. I think because I think grafting is the right word, isn't it? When you work really hard to get something. I think because Ukrainians have had to, even like historically, traditionally, to fight for that freedom, independence. I think that's why we are kind of a bit different in that regard, and that's why we are always like quite possessive, like this is mine, and I won't give this away. I think that's probably what it comes down to.
That's the second question I want to ask you, is that, Maria, what's something about British culture Ukrainians misjudge?
Oh gosh, there's probably so many things. I think the main thing that I think, unfortunately, Ukrainians don't understand, and I understand why they don't understand, because it's very, very bizarre and different to Ukraine, is that so many things here are like overloaded, and that's why they don't work properly. And a lot of Ukrainians, when they end up in this environment, they sometimes think that it's because they're Ukrainian, because they're not British, that's why they get in this treatment. And it's like Spain, no, like everybody's struggling with this. Everybody's struggling with NHS because it's very difficult in general, because it's overloaded, overcrowded. Everybody's struggling with other services, and I think that's probably one of the good things that are important to understand, because it's quite a bad statement to be in when you like feel that people are unfair to you. That's something that I think is important to understand, because it makes things easier to understand that it's not about you. It's about the country, unfortunately, being sort of overrun and overloaded.
Thank you. Jaz, what do British people usually get wrong about Ukrainians?
It's the lack of exposure to Ukrainians more than anything that causes any level of confusion, because they've never really met, prior to 2022, they'd never really met a Ukrainian. The chance of doing so was minuscule. So I always like the ridiculous Ukrainian backlash that you see on X, formerly known as Twitter, as we now have to call it, where they're all like, oh, they're all blonde-haired and blue-eyed. And I'm like, are they? Where are these people in Ukraine that I do that? Or, so I think it's very much not so much a case of that they know them. But I would say that the flip side to that is that there was certainly a huge perception at the start of the all-out invasion where Brits were opening their homes up and welcoming Ukrainians here. Absolutely fantastic. Great to see them doing that. But there was absolutely this perception of, well, we're European and they're European, so therefore they're just like me. And there was so many arguments, and the number of calls we had, a number of people who had questions over bedtime, schooling, education, healthcare, whatever it would be. And so it certainly wasn't the fault of Ukrainians, but it was just this clear misunderstanding that, well, just because you are, we are largely white and European, and you are largely white and European, that we have all of these cultural similarities, and we just don't.
Yeah, there's a lot of differences. Thank you. To both of you, what lessons could Ukrainians learn from British society and vice versa?
Oh, no, please do.
I can give quite a local answer because obviously we live up in Manchester, and I do free walking tours of Manchester for Ukrainians together with local guides. Free Manchester walking tours are amazing people, and I think Ukrainians, when they end up in any UK city, most of the time they don't really know anything about that city. I mean, London, okay, maybe a little, but other than that, Manchester, they maybe would have heard the name or would have heard of Manchester United or Manchester City, something football related. But other than that, no. And then when we do these tours and we tell them that in the last 30 years, Manchester had 2 terrorist attacks, and we show pictures of Manchester after the IRA bomb in 1996, the year you came, by the way, and the whole city centre just destroyed, and then how it was rebuilt, that's something I think that inspires Ukrainians because they see that cities can be rebuilt very, very successfully. Or, the Ariana Grande terrorist attack in 2017 and how people came together. And these are the stories that I think can inspire Ukrainians because they see that British people are a bit like them as well, because Ukrainians are also very united. And I think vice versa, British people can learn from Ukraine, because there's been so many innovations in the last 3 years that unfortunately are dictated by the realities of war, but still. So I think that's something that a lot of Britain was built on immigration, especially Manchester and Liverpool. There was all these immigrants from Belgium, Jewish people, all coming to work at those factories during the Industrial Revolution. And that's why those cities are very welcoming. And that's why I think it's very good to find those similarities between people and see where we can learn from each other. So I know it's quite a regional answer, especially to give in London, but I think that's something that's very, very nice to think of, is that Ukrainians are not the first immigrants to come to Manchester. Manchester is a very welcoming city. Ukrainians can bring their skill set because they're incredibly hardworking. One of my friends who actually lives in the UK as well, she said this very, very interesting thing. She said that in Ukraine, it's live, by the way, I asked her permission if I can quote her. She said yes. Live fast, die young. And in the UK, it's live slow and prosper. And I think that sums it up really, really well. Ukrainians, they just like try and achieve everything very, very fast. It's almost like we think that, in 10 years' time, we're no longer going to live and therefore we need to do everything like as soon as possible. Whereas in the UK, there's no rush. It's like this live slow and prosper.
Jaz?
I think learning from each other, there's what's really interesting. I think it can touch on what Maria said before, which was that there was this conversation where Ukrainians come to the UK and then they find out that things are different here. And they think that because it's different, it's some sort of prejudice. I'm like, no, it's just a bit crap. And so I look at something like Dia app and I think, that's wonderful. That's great. And Ukraine now is, this wonderful, technologically advanced place. It's really, really ploughing forwards. And I love that. And because it's far enough away, there are things that we can look at and systems in place in Ukraine that work far better than the UK. And there are things in the UK that work far better than Ukraine. And it's just looking at those systems and how they can integrate and how we can improve those systems to make people's lives better or easier or more straightforward. But one of the problems that you always have is that it doesn't matter how good your English is. If you come here and you don't understand what you need to say when you get on a bus, or how to organise a doctor's thing, or whatever, you're absolutely ruined. So we now do a lot of work with councils where we put on events for Ukrainians, because the simple answer is that if you say to a Ukrainian, go and find an event for you and your family to attend in Bolton, they wouldn't know how to find it, and they wouldn't know where it was, even if they could find it. And there'd be so many different barriers towards getting there. So it's understanding different systems and learning those different systems. And I'm sure you've seen them on the chat groups or whatever about driving licenses or marriage licenses or that. And it's absolutely no different from if you look on expats in Kiev or whatever it would be called, where like, I want to buy a house, or I want to get married, or I want to get divorced, or I want to get temporary residency or permanent residence or whatever, is that it's all about learning the systems and how you can interact with those systems.
Perfect, you're right. Many debate between you both. Are British people too reserved, or are Ukrainians too blunt?
That's a great question. I wouldn't say that British people are particularly reserved. They certainly have a level about them, but it depends where you are. So again, we're from Manchester, where everyone is really, really friendly, and the Ukrainians have all sorts of God, everyone's really friendly here. So you don't have that level of reservation about it. Have I been on the receiving end of a Ukrainian being very, very blunt? Absolutely. But in the same way, I'm autistic. So they've been on the receiving end of me being really blunt in the same way, because I simply don't understand that emotion. And I certainly absolutely lack tact, which probably makes me ideal to fit into Ukraine.
No, I was going to say that probably in our couple, I'm the reserved one and you're the blunt one. So tables are turned.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, these Ukrainians, they're really blunt. They don't have much tact. And I'm like, that's my life. No wonder I fit in so well. But I do know that Ukrainians quite frequently don't necessarily, I'm told, don't enjoy small talk, which is probably tough for them when they meet me, because they get forced into it. So I think it's ultimately, you just have to deal with these things, really. British people, are they reserved? Really? Perhaps. I think
not on a Friday night.
Yeah, I was going to say,
everyone's drinking.
Yeah, I think at your local spoons, no one's particularly reserved, and they all have that.
That being said, I think the art of networking in the UK is probably a lot more advanced. I might get shot for this.
Really?
Yeah, I think for Ukrainians, networking is quite a difficult concept. Have you noticed this as well?
Yeah, it's true. Networking, when it comes, I think Ukrainians can learn a lot from the British when it comes to networking. Because in UK, if you really want to get the good job or business, whatever the case is, it's all about networking, recommendation. Like LinkedIn, LinkedIn, perfect. A lot of Ukrainians don't even know what LinkedIn and how to use it effectively. I mean,
unfortunately, don't know how to sell themselves.
Yeah, that's
something I've struggled with as well. That's actually something I've not forgotten to raise, is that so many Ukrainians have got such amazing experience, they just don't know how to talk about it at all.
Yeah, they feel like if they're selling themselves, like they're bragging about it. But in UK, it's normal. You have to brag to get the job that you want to, because 100 people go into one vacancy. You need to know how to sell yourself.
And that goes against that reservedness that we were just talking about,
See, but I'd also say it's slightly different. This is really interesting for me to hear that you guys are saying this, because what I would say is that my experience of people looking for jobs in Ukraine is that the traditional, as I would call it, traditional CV and cover letter don't exist. Actually, getting a job in Ukraine is about networking. And
I wouldn't say it's because networking. I think it's because the markets in Ukraine are smaller, and people usually know, at least in my experience, I didn't really need to sell myself in Ukraine. People would come to me, and still, like on LinkedIn, I get Ukrainian companies messaging me saying, would you like to apply for this position? We've got this position just open, looks like you're a great candidate for that. People just kind of, because the industries are smaller, in my opinion, they just know about other people. So that's why I think a lot of Ukrainians have this mindset, I don't really need to talk about myself, because those who need to know already know. But of course, in the UK, it doesn't work like that, because the industries are so overcrowded. So I think it's not because Ukrainians are so good at networking, it's because it's already expected that people would have heard about you if you do good things in Ukraine.
Okay, that's completely fair enough. I mean, I know certainly in terms of job hunting and stuff like that, Ukrainians, despite what they say at the job centre and Restart and various things like that, they certainly don't teach Ukrainians enough of the skills about what needs to go in a cover letter and what needs to be done in a job interview. And when we were lucky, we've got 2 part-time people who work alongside us, and they really, really help us, and they're amazing. And we put these jobs out, and they were British spec, but they were designed for Ukrainians who've come here, because speaking Ukrainian is one of the requirements. So that kind of limits who's going to apply. And we said, we need a cover letter, and we need this, and they're well-paid jobs, and they're flexible, they're remote working, so lots of positives about it. And so we saw firsthand the quality of cover letters and the quality of interviewees. And it kind of made me understand one of the big struggles that Ukrainians have around work and employment here is that they don't, again, it comes back to systems. They don't understand the UK system. When it comes to a cover letter, they don't understand what the STAR system is. So even though we provided the questions for the interviews in advance and said that we're looking for answers on STAR, so, because it's not like what we do is particularly fast paced. So we don't need somebody to think on their feet. We don't need them to kind of come on a podcast and ask them all about culture and history. And we're kind of going, oh, we haven't even thought about that before. So we wanted people to give the best representation of themselves, and they still were struggling to do that. So there is absolutely this thing where you've got to learn to sell yourself. And I've spent so much time with Maria teaching her how to, go into a room and meet strangers, because she has to do that these days. She has to go into a room. I can't always be there. And whether she's with politicians or journalists or activists or whoever, she needs to basically make her mark on that room. And certainly Ukrainians need to be able to do that, because it doesn't matter how great you are if you can't show that and demonstrate that to somebody in 30 seconds.
You're right. Yeah, Jaz, you're right. I'm going to go for topic 3 because we're a bit limited with time. Topic 3 is on language, identity, and belonging. So we're going to focus on communication, self-expression, and feeling in between. So Jaz, this is the question for you. How do you feel when Maria speaks Ukrainian in public or with others? Do you feel left out, curious, or proud?
A bit of both. Well, 3 things really. My Ukrainian, shocking, absolutely shocking, and I'm very much of the mindset that post-victory, when we return to Ukraine, I will enter into full-time classes. I think it's very, very important for me to be able to learn and speak some Ukrainian. I'm not claiming I'll ever be fluent, but I think it's really, really important. So when I hear Maria, Maria is such a cheat. Like I said, compared to other Ukrainians, because she came here and did her A-levels and degree here. So everyone's kind of like, when she first got here, she was, in 2020, like, your English is really good. And she's like, thank you. And I'm like, well, bloody should be, after all that time, time here, so it should be. But they didn't know that. But of course, Maria is fluent in English and fluent in Polish, although she'll pretend she isn't. But she's on the train down today. She was reading a Polish novel. Fluent in English, and she's fluent in one other language that we don't talk about. And I can't help but be impressed by that. And I was always, language is this wonderful thing. And I always love how whenever I go to sort of Ukraine, or whenever I go to any other country, and somebody comes up to me and like, oh, I'm sorry, but my English is very bad. And I'm like, if I could say that in another language, I'd be like, I am fluent in that language. I could say anything I want in that language. And so that's why, I'd learned to go on Moja Ukraińska dużo pohana, because that's all I can say. But I figured, well, if I could say that, that's all I can do. And it's brilliant for me. So when I hear Maria speaking Ukrainian, it's brilliant. It's there, but she's so seamless jumping between languages because she's so good at them that, you just kind of go, right, sod you then, show off, fine.
A question to both of you. Has being together changed how you see your own national identity?
Well, I think in the last 3 years, because obviously, as I said, I was quite anglicized in the past. And there was a big time of my life when I was actually mainly using English. Like I would be reading English books and listening only to English music, because unfortunately before 2022, there wasn't that much Ukrainian music. I would listen to the ones that existed, but it wasn't such, it wasn't mass production of Ukrainian songs. Since 2022, I've been reading pretty much in Ukrainian, all the new Ukrainian books that come out. I've been listening to so many Ukrainian bands. So I think that I have become, it sounds weird because I am Ukrainian, but I have become more Ukrainian in the last 3 years. And that's also because, I spend so much time talking to Ukrainians here in the UK. And when I was in Ukraine, I was working always in the English language environment, quite often with foreigners as well, because when I was the chief editor of Media Outlet, I had Americans, Brits working in my team. So I have become more Ukrainian. Again, sounds weird, but that's through active choice and through seeing that Ukrainian products are actually on par and quite often superior to products in other countries. I'm not saying this because I'm Ukrainian and I think that I should be pushing for my own culture. I think I genuinely believe that there's so much quality product made in Ukraine these days.
Yeah, I agree. Jaz, you got anything to say?
I saw quality products and just looked down at my Dodo socks. It's very hard. I think it comes down to what we discussed earlier, what I spoke about earlier, and British nationalism. And so sometimes it's very, very tricky to be British without that sort of thing. Also Maria kind of touched on it earlier, which was when she was talking about when she went to watch United versus Liverpool and how United fans hate Liverpool fans. And Maria likes to kind of tell this story about how, like, I don't necessarily see myself as British. I see myself as Mancunian. But then I also don't like North Manchester. I only like South Manchester. And I don't even really like East or West Manchester. So actually I only like a really small part of Manchester. So but you don't necessarily have that wonderful sort of love for arts and culture and everything British, because generally speaking, when something's proud of being British, it's a negative. And that's not to say we don't do some amazing things. Of course, we absolutely do. You know, we're from Manchester, where we had the world's first programmable computer. You know, The Weeknd, not the artist, the actual Weeknd itself is a result of us. You know, the Industrial Revolution, splitting the atom, graphene. You know, we have these wonderful suffragette movements. We have all these wonderful things. Rolls-Royce. We can keep just throwing them in. David Beckham, you're welcome. He's technically from London. But you know, in terms of music, you've got Oasis and.
Sorry about that.
You've got Oasis and Stone Roses and the Smiths and you know, bands that have changed the world. But for me, it's very much you know, very much a Mancunian thing that I'm more proud of than I ever will a British thing.
You know, you said about British, about that nationalism. I always wondered, why is it in UK, London, because I'm in London, why is it in UK, London, no one's got a flag? The only time you see a flag, a British flag, is a parliament or somewhere. So like when England's playing football. That's it. That's the only time you see an English flag come on. But never if you go to someone's house, you never see a flag.
Yeah.
Let's go to topic 4, public work and private pressure. So we're going to focus on visibility, backlash, storytelling. So I want to ask a question to Maria. Maria, what toll does it take on you to constantly explain Ukraine to foreigners?
Difficult. That's why I'm very grateful for Jaz's support. I think a lot of the time when something absolutely crazy goes on in the news, such as with Trump, that happens quite often. You know, I talk to Ukrainians a lot, as I mentioned, to fellow Ukrainians. And I hear these things like, oh yeah, the news cycle has just been crazy, so I've not really been following the news. And it's like, as a journalist and as somebody who gets contacted whenever there's a major Ukraine story, you know, I start getting messages from producers like, can you come on LBC, BBC and talk about this? And so I don't have that privilege to just pretend that it's not happening. So I have to kind of a little bit abstract myself that, you know, that this is my country and this is something that's going to massively impact me and my future, and just look at it a bit more from like, right, okay, I'm going to study this because I'm a journalist. I'm going to look into this and try and analyze this. And Jaz has been incredibly supportive. You know, he supports me psychologically. He supports me with helping me with anything that I need to tackle. So it's difficult, but that's something that I've been used. I remember when we were fleeing the war and fleeing the invasion, just after spending 23 hours on our foot without any food, water, toilet facilities, like sort of horrible crashing and people dying in the crash. All of this, like, journalists wanting to interview, and then I described what I've just been through, and they're like, oh, maybe we shouldn't interview you, like maybe you need some time. And I'm like, no, it's fine, honestly. Like, and I would just give those interviews, and that's because I'm used to it. And you know, as a journalist, I think you kind of learn to navigate between both worlds. Like, this is my country, but also this is my job. So I think I've gotten used to it now.
Thank you, Maria. I've got a question for you, Jaz, on this one. What's the most ignorant comment someone has made about your partner's country?
Oh, wow.
They probably all come from Jaz as well.
Yeah, they do. They I mean, the Twitter trolls just have a field day. And so Maria will tell the story probably better than I will. So I'll give Maria a little introduction for this. Maria, tell me about your interaction with the Communist Party of Great Britain.
Oh gosh, yeah, there's a lot of people thinking that they understand. So, as you'll know, it happens all the time. You know, a new war will break out and somebody who went there 30 years ago to that country will pretend to be an expert. So people like to think that they're an expert in things that they completely know nothing about. So I've had a few problems, I think, with both right-wing and left-wing in the UK, but I think most notably it would be the left-wing, particularly the British Communist Party in Manchester, because that's where the Communist Manifesto was written, and that's where social, you know, rights and working class people are very, like, in the centre of everything. They still have people marching with hammer and sickle on specific days, especially when there were like rail strikes. They would come together, the RMT, it's called, isn't it? And then the communists would join in as well. And when I saw that in the city centre, it was weird because it was at the same time as the Ukrainian rally was on. I took a photo and posted it on Twitter. And that's at the time when, you know, I had huge sort of engagement on Twitter. So every time I would post something, it would just go viral quite a lot. And I posted saying, why is this okay? Because in Ukraine, as you'll know, hammer and sickle is a banned symbol for right reasons. You know, millions of Ukrainians were killed under that banner, including my great-grandfather and great-great-grandfather by Stalin's order. And like lots of people started responding. And the British Communist Party, quote, tweeted me. But the most ridiculous thing, they said, oh, well, are you saying that we now should ban symbols? What's next? Are we going to ban languages and religion and books? That's not how we want to live. And I'm like, guys, you're describing the Soviet Union, because religion was banned there, languages were banned there, books were banned there. Like, do you not realize who you're talking to? You're talking to a Ukrainian who, even though I was born in independent Ukraine, I have a Soviet birth certificate because they, it took them a few months to change those over. And my mum lived through Soviet times, and my whole family, as I said, and had to suffer for it. But also, I studied Soviet studies at university. Like, it was just the most ludicrous thing to be lectured by those communism lovers in the UK who don't actually know anything about what communism looks like, not on paper, but in real life.
Maria, you touched on point, because I see this on social media as well. I see a lot of Western people that I see a lot of memes saying that communism is a right thing to do, or the socialists and so forth. And there was one guy who wrote in a comment, he's saying a lot of the West want to be like how it was socialism or communism, but in reality, they don't know what's it like to live in communism. Why don't you speak to the people that really work in communism? If you looked at all these Baltic, Romania, Bulgaria, all these, why do they want to be part of Europe? They don't want to be part of Russia no more. They don't want to be that kind of, how can I say, ideology or that system of living. They don't want to live there because they know what's it like to live in that system. It's brutality as well. They want to be part of the West. They want to involve. So yeah, what you just said there, it's a big thing. So I'm going to go for topic 5 now. Building a new identity together. Question to both of you. What does home mean to you both now?
I'll take this. I think home for both of us now at the moment is a very strange thing. We have a home, we have a temporary home. Ukrainians, we like to say that Ukrainians are welcome in their temporary home. And it feels for us very much like a temporary home. We have to balance things very, very trickily. So we're aware that we run an organisation and we help loads of Ukrainians and we do loads of great stuff. And Maria probably has a wonderful story that she can tell you about our interaction with a soldier, frontline soldier in a bar in Lviv. But we are still absolutely powered by survivor's guilt and grief. And that's not going away. So we're in this wonderful position where we get to do some great stuff and we stay here because that's where our base is and we can be the most effective that we are here. But in reality, Maria's heart all the time is in Ukraine. There's no escaping that. And the happiness and look on her face every time she crosses the border into Ukraine from Poland is wonderful to see. The look on my face every time I watch Karpati is probably quite interesting to see, particularly after the last minute win against Alexandria yesterday. Wonderful. Thank you, Chachua. You made me very happy. But I think that there's this weird thing. So we are so in between two places. And I think one of the things that Ukrainians struggle with is the fact that currently, rightly or wrongly, they are in Britain, but they've got their friends, their family back in Ukraine. They can't necessarily bring their friends and family over from Ukraine. They may never be able to do that. And in fact, they may well be asked to leave or their visa may be expired and they may be expected to go back to Ukraine. So everybody here involved in this, and I'm certainly not singling us out. I'm not saying we're particularly special in this respect because everybody knows someone who's fighting. Everyone knows someone who's being killed. So we're all leading these double lives that are on pause. And one of the things we spoke about sort of pre-recording was how Ukrainians have come here and they've got all these wonderful skills and talents and the degree rate is twice that in the UK. But it doesn't matter if you're a doctor or a lawyer or an accountant back in Ukraine. When you come here, you're facing exactly the same problems compared to somebody else who wasn't a doctor or lawyer or accountant back in Ukraine. You've all got to start from that point, rebuild your life, only to then at some point, hopefully sooner rather than later, you'll have this situation. Ukraine has won. You can all go back to Ukraine and you've got to rebuild your life again.
You said about both worlds. This is the question for both of you. Are you building a life that blends the best of both worlds, or do you still feel pulled between them?
Well, I think Jaz has already kind of answered that question by saying that it's always kind of trying to balance both. But to go back to the previous question, for me, the answer is much more simple. Home is 100% Kiev. Not even Ukraine. I mean, obviously Ukraine is home, but it's being in Kiev and being specifically in Podil, in the area where I spend most of my life. That's always going to be home. The UK is a temporary home, but Kiev is always, it will always be, and hopefully will be home in all senses, in physical senses as well. Do we try to? I think, yes, as we said, we try to incorporate some things within the British society that are useful, like such as, being able to sell yourself, how to talk about your achievements. So yes, probably, but we're still very much Ukraine focused in what we do, I would say. Do you agree with that?
I'd completely agree. Again, we run an organisation. We help Ukraine. The primary focus of that is helping Ukrainians so that they settle in, they retain their skills, they learn new skills so they can go and help with the rebuild. So everything we do from the minute we wake up to the minute we go to sleep every single day is about Ukraine. And I would be lying if I said that I didn't feel like this was almost a treading water temporary period in our lives where we do this, and yes, we can leverage it or balance it or whatever it needs to be, but we do this, and then actually Ukraine wins and we go back, and from that point there's a whole new chapter, a whole new story in our lives that will occur, and ultimately the life that we have right now, yes, we're incredibly lucky. Maria's incredibly privileged, got a roof over her head, she speaks fluent English, she's in the media all the time. But if you were to offer her the option of saying you can give all of that up and Ukraine has their victory and you can go home and you never talk about your time in England again, she'll snap both your arms off. It's not even a consideration. So we're in this situation because we're in this situation, not because we actively choose to be. And we would love to be in a position where we could be back in Ukraine, arguing over whether to live in Podil or Lviv. Perhaps, Maria, we could live in Lviv. Hint. No, not happening at all. But we would love to be choosing what we can do without, having this burden upon us where we feel like we have to do all this stuff, which we're thrilled to be doing and grateful to be doing. But it is also, there is a burden that comes with that.
Thank you. I would like to ask both of you guys, what's one piece of advice you'd give to other international couples or migrants trying to integrate?
Or for living in the UK? Just get to know people, just talk to people, network. I think even though the UK is incredibly transparent and all the, hiring process incredibly transparent, you don't get the same opportunities as when you speak to people, because you find out about more, you find out about people you can get advice from. They're not going to get you hired, but they'll give you tips that will be useful to get hired. So it's just go out and talk. We have a very funny story about my mum when she just came in the first couple of months. We were always very encouraging for her to get out of the house and do things. But she was like, oh, but I'm doing Duolingo every day. I'm like, Mum, you don't need Duolingo. Just go out, get some, get some volunteering experience. So it's pretty much that. Just go out and do things, no matter what it is.
I would say, so there's a couple of things. People coming here, and I think it's generally quite good life advice, and certainly something that I've pushed on Maria, which is learn what you can do for other people far more than what you can take from people. So if we can give up our time to help somebody out, brilliant. If we can give up our knowledge, so it's there. So we've done walking tours for some very big Ukrainian bands, and they've kind of been like, oh, what do you want to do? I'm like, no, we just wanted to do something nice so we could show you around Manchester whilst you were here. So that's where our skills lie, that's where our talents lie. So like we advise Lifeline, or we support Lifeline Ukraine. We advise an organisation called Taz Churchman's Invincible Defenders. Taz Churchman was a software engineer who was Carpati Ultra, joined on the first day and was killed. So huge support for him. I'm currently helping a small settlement with a plan so that it can move towards twinning with other cities. And I don't want anything in return for this. I'm not looking for money. I'm not looking for an ego boost. I'm not looking for that. But the fact is that, I'm just helping them. And down the line, I might need something. It's unlikely. But the answer is that people need to be prepared to use their skills to give, because that's the key to networking. The key to networking isn't just going, can you give me something? Because those people who can give you something, they get asked that all day, every day. So actually flip that around and go, hi, I've got this, or you've got this problem, and I can help you with that. You don't have to take me up on it, but just know if you need me, I can help you with that. And that's how relationships and good, solid relationships are formed, is, people being prepared to give and being able to support.
Thank you very much, Maria and Jaz. I've just got one final question that I always ask on the Identity Talks is, what advice would you give to someone struggling with their identity?
Well, I think there's a very popular phrase that I think goes around within Ukrainian communities these days, is that if you're not fighting on the front line, you have to be, I think it makes more sense, but basically if you're not fighting, you still have to be helping the fight. So no matter where you are, I think I can understand the urge to just get on because you have a family to look after. You suddenly go from being two parents to being one parent because your husband is back in Ukraine. There is that urge to sort of just concentrate on that and just getting through, your daily life. But I still think that it's every Ukrainian's responsibility to be helping Ukraine these days, no matter what form or shape that takes. If you have a big audience, that's about like sharing some stuff and sharing some articles and sharing some, facts with people. If you are able to go to the rallies that take place in a lot of UK cities, just doing that. If you have friends that you can talk to and educate a little bit about Ukraine and what's going on, doing that. So I think it's every Ukrainian's responsibility to be helping Ukraine no matter what. I don't know if that actually answered the question. Do you have a better answer or a different answer?
I think for me, be proud. Be proud of who you are. Be proud of what you've done. Be proud of what you've accomplished. Don't be shy about it. People want to hear that. It's not about money. It's never about money, but it's about community and how you can support community. So be proud of that. So if you're from a different culture, be proud of your culture. Be proud of your heritage. Be proud of your history, because you are an unofficial ambassador for wherever you're from, whether that's your religion or your race or your country or your culture. You are, whenever you see someone, they will associate you with your background and with your culture. So you need to be a shining example of what that person is.
Jaz and Maria, thank you very much for being on Identity Talks. Is there a final thing that you'd like to say to the audience from yourself? Any message you have? Anything that you want to promote?
I would like to quickly say to everybody that they should look up Lifeline Ukraine Suicide Prevention Hotline. They should look up Taras Chuchman's Invincible Defenders, a wonderful, wonderful organisation that takes Ukrainian soldiers who are in rehab for a day out to the football. It's really, really important for them because they think when they're in the rehab that everyone has forgotten about them. But actually when they turn up to the football, they find that the fans want photos and to shake their hand, and even the players want to do that. So it gives them a really, really good ego boost, and it really helps them keep going. So it's absolutely important for me. So please look up those two organisations, and if you can support them in any way, shape or form, they will hugely appreciate it. For facts and figures purposes, Lifeline Ukraine pre-2022, Lifeline, which is the only suicide prevention hotline in Ukraine, was getting about 1,000 calls a month. Wow. It's now getting 6,000 calls a month. So if you want to look at what is coming over the hill in terms of issues with mental health and issues with PTSD, that's going to be an absolutely vital tool, and the work they do is absolutely incredible. And finally, Unbroken Ukraine, we love them. They're brilliant. They do amazing rehab stuff, and a big shout out to Fierce Calm as well, who do awesome stuff within the rehab centres.
Jaz, where is it that our followers can follow you and support your work as well? You and Maria.
If they want to harass Maria, which they should, because she's far more active than me. As I said, she's far more beautiful, so she has photos and everything that people like. She is generally across all social medias at Rom Marie. For me, I'm usually found at Jaz Myers. And if people want to email me, jaz@talksforukraine.com, or Maria, because she has a very small ego, maria@mariaromanenko.com.
Thank you very much to both of you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.